So you may have clicked on this video because you're feeling a little lost, or you might be struggling and need some answers, and I might be able to help. My name is Jo, and towards the end of last year, and just a few days after turning 26, I was diagnosed with ADHD. Now, if you know me, you might be thinking, Jo, you don't have ADHD. ADHD is for little boys in the classroom who can't sit still and can never pay attention, and that's actually a very common stereotype, but ADHD actually goes a whole lot deeper than that. ADHD is neurodiversity, which affects the human brain in areas such as sociability, learning, attention, and mood. Other neurodiversities include autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and OCD, just to name a few. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Now that might be what it stands for, but it can be a little bit misleading. There are in fact 3 subtypes of ADHD: hyperactive, inattentive, and combined. People with a predominantly hyperactive type may feel a need to move constantly. They might fidget, talk over others, have difficulty paying attention, make impulsive decisions, and feel like they're driven by a motor. This type is more commonly diagnosed in children, more commonly boys, men, and those who are born male. Predominantly inattentive ADHD, previously known as ADD, presents itself a little differently. People with this type may have difficulty sustaining attention, following instructions, and keeping themselves organised. They might struggle with working memory, lose things, and get easily distracted. This type is more commonly diagnosed in women, young girls, and those who are born female. And lastly, there's combined ADHD, where it's a combo of 6 or more symptoms of both the hyperactive and inattentive types. But let's take a closer look at inattentive ADHD, which is what I was diagnosed with. I will say that every individual with ADHD is unique and will present their symptoms differently from the next person with ADHD. So an important thing to remember is if you've met one person with ADHD, then that's it. You've met one person with ADHD. Now, I've known I've been somewhat different my entire life and never really knowing why. I've struggled my entire life. I've struggled with school, keeping up a hobby, friendships, relationships, whatever job I've had, struggling to fit in, and just, well, the list goes on. The frustrating thing is, as girls and women are more likely to present inattentive symptoms, they're less likely to be recognised and even less likely to be diagnosed. We may have been the ones in class staring out the window and appearing like we're not paying attention or doodling in our exercise books. We might have struggled in subjects like maths but excelled in creative subjects like art and drama. We might zone out in conversations and blurt things out and talk over people. We might start a new hobby every week and never keep them up. We put things down and lose them a second later. We have a bad handle of our money. We might have been avid readers as children but now struggle to just read one chapter of a book. Boredom can feel physically painful. We are easily overwhelmed. We are chronically impatient. We could be hot-headed, easily frustrated, and the littlest of things can ruin our day. We could be perfectionists and never be satisfied with anything we do. We live pretty much every day of our lives feeling guilty about everything. We sometimes feel like we work harder than others and have nothing to show for it. We may present inattentive symptoms externally, but can experience hyperactivity internally where our brains just never, ever stop. Now, something that's worth mentioning is the term masking. Masking, or camouflaging, is when someone with ADHD presents themselves in a way that makes it seem like they're not struggling with the disorder. It may be a way for people with ADHD to feel like they fit in socially and avoid being stigmatised and feel more accepted. And this tends to go unnoticed in women as we mask in a way that society expects us to. We keep quiet. We don't tend to show our eagerness or excitement about something that we enjoy because we don't want to appear too much for others. We don't express our feelings. We tend to be people pleasers and avoid conflict. We have absolutely no idea what's going on in our brains or how to handle them properly, that we could be more prone to self-medicating with things like impulsive spending, drinking, caffeine consumption, binge eating, drug abuse, and gambling. These are all things that can help us chase that feel-good chemical that people with ADHD are low on: dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical messenger and what experts call a neurotransmitter in our brains. It's involved in functions like emotional regulation, motivation, and reward. It's there to help you stay motivated and focused on whatever goal you might have. Studies show that people with ADHD who aren't medicated have lower levels of these dopamine transporters, so we will try and find other ways to fill the gap. There are also other things worth mentioning that people with ADHD often struggle with as well. Things such as rejection-sensitive dysphoria, auditory processing disorder, emotion regulation, oppositional defiant disorder, sensory overload, misophonia, anxiety, depression, fatigue, and other various learning disorders, just to name a few. And we tend to mask all of these as well, so it's really, really exhausting. I realised not long ago that I've actually been masking my entire life and even self-medicating without knowing. But I realised something was wrong when I was completely burnt out by the age of 23. So when I was 22, 23, I thought I was on my desired career path. I'd got my diploma a few years before and I thought I knew what I was doing. The only way I can really describe it is that my body seems to be going at a different pace to my brain, and I had no idea what was going on. I realised that I just didn't fit in at my current job. I couldn't keep up, I couldn't retain information and instructions, I was constantly asking to be shown stuff again and again. I was constantly asking for reassurance. I was incredibly overwhelmed and it made me anxious, and I had nobody to talk to about it because I couldn't communicate how I was feeling, because every day I was asking myself, what is wrong with me? So I ended up leaving the job. I ended up leaving my career path, which is what I thought I wanted, and I was stuck. But there is no job worth putting your mental health on the line for. There just isn't. When I left this job, I was completely stuck. I just stopped. And I was again asking myself, what is wrong with me? Why can't I function like everybody else? Why do I keep making careless mistakes? Why don't I fit in? Why am I so behind compared to my friends and my peers? What's wrong with me? Now, I know these are probably questions that everybody asks themselves in their early 20s, but I couldn't get past it. And to be honest, I'm still not past it. I even tried starting my own online business, but couldn't keep it up because I found it too overwhelming. I was just completely stuck. And the thought of working with and for other people genuinely terrified me, because I was so scared of making a mistake that the mask would slip and everybody would see me for a fraud, and that I didn't know what I was doing, and that I just couldn't function as an adult. Yeah, funnily enough, imposter syndrome plays a massive part in ADHD, it turns out. You know, I've read so many stories of women who have been falsely diagnosed with either depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, when in actual fact they've had a neurodivergency such as ADHD their entire lives and they never knew. And most of the time it goes down to the fact that they're not believed or taken seriously, myself included. It's hard to ignore the hyperactive symptoms that we see in children with ADHD, and another reason that women and girls might not get a diagnosis is that there's been unequal focus on men and boys in ADHD study and research. Not only that, but the ADHD diagnosis journey really isn't ADHD friendly. But aside from all that, there are actually some positives to having ADHD. We can be more creative, imaginative, and compassionate. We have a great sense of humour. We have what I think is the amazing ability to hyper-focus on something that interests us and engages us, and that we know every single little thing about it. We're good problem solvers. And our brains are just full of random snippets of information and facts that you definitely want one of us on your quiz team. You know, there's a lot I've learned over the past year, as I've actually known I've had ADHD longer than I've had an official diagnosis. And I'm sure, like many others, I thought that ADHD was something that only children and mostly boys had, and that they would grow out of it. It never crossed my mind that absolutely anybody can have it and you can't grow out of it. I was most likely born with ADHD, and the fact is, it's genetic. It runs in families. I didn't know that to have ADHD means you have a chemical imbalance in your brain. It makes living with other conditions even harder. Side note, I'm also a type 1 diabetic and was born without a thyroid gland, but I think that's a whole other video. ADHD isn't a trendy quirk that makes you unable to sit still and notice every squirrel that goes by. It can be depressing and it can be debilitating. But I think the most important thing I've learned is that I'm not alone with this. There are more and more people getting answers as to why they may have struggled more than their friends, more than their peers, more so than everybody else. A hard thing I've learned is that the world just isn't built for neurodiverse people. The stigma is still very much here. But I'm hoping that will change. So if you're someone with ADHD, think they might have ADHD, seeking out a diagnosis, or if you can relate to any of this, just know you're not alone. I'm not here to diagnose, but if you find yourself having watched this and thinking, oh my god, yes, that's me, just like I did when I went down the ADHD rabbit hole, it's also important to remember that you might relate to all of this and it might not be ADHD. The best thing to do is to talk to a doctor or medical professional. Believe me, it's the best thing I've ever done. You know, I won't lie, it's not been an easy journey, but overall it's been worth it. I think the main reason for starting this channel is to learn how to unmask after living with undiagnosed ADHD for 26 years. And figure out why I am the way that I am. So, welcome to ADHDefined. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment and subscribe. There is so much more to talk about. Thanks for watching.